All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'm not Johnny. I don't look like Johnny. You noticed that? I have slightly more hair than Johnny, although not for long because of my male pattern baldness here. Okay, so we're continuing kind of this neighboring kind of topic. We've been in for a while, and we've talked about a lot of different topics in this class. But last class we were specifically talking about starting spiritual conversations. And one of the things we sort of left off of that discussion was how you can share your testimony, how you can share your own story. And this is really, I think, really important as part of what we do when we're neighboring. Because obviously, as we're listening to other people, it gives them an opportunity then to listen to us. As we've heard their story, they will naturally be a little more curious about our story. And you've probably noticed this, even in casual conversations with people, even if it never turns spiritual, that the more you probe other people for their stories, they tend to turn the same kind of questions around to you. Well, what's your story? Where are you from? Who are you? And so those provide opportunities for us to share our story. Let me ask you guys this question here. When you think of a testimony or when you think of giving your testimony, what do you think? Well, we get sort of a working definition. What does that mean to give someone your testimony?
When you're in court, your testimony is what happened.
Okay, great definition, right? What happened? Yeah. So what has taken place, and you're giving an account of that. Yep. When you think of giving your personal testimony to somebody else, specifically as it relates to your Christian faith, what's a good working definition of that? It's an account of, or it's the story about what? Yeah.
I would say it's telling how you came to Christ.
Okay, yeah.
But including in that the gospel of the death, burial, resurrection of Christ.
Right. Yes. Okay, so that's really key. That's really important, right? Is that it's an account of something that happened to you. True, and it's an account of a message you heard and trusted in and believed. So yeah, I think that's really key there. It's a story about how a Christian came to hear, understand, and believe the gospel. So a good testimony is both, one, it's uniquely personal. It's personal to your own life, but it's also not just personal. That's really important, right? It's not just, here's a personal story about my life, but it's here's a personal story about how I came in contact with the risen Jesus in a way that changed my life, in a way that set me on a completely different trajectory or course in my life, in a way that utterly changed me. So those are really key kind of concepts there. And you're right. I think this is really key too to the definition of a testimony. In biblical Greek, anytime you see that word testimony in the New Testament, it comes from a court language. It's a courtroom term, right? It's a courtroom term. We still use the same kind of terminology today in a court of law. It basically means it's either in a court of law sense or in a historical sense. A testimony is of a spectator sharing about what happened. You're a witness to something. In this case, in the case of Christian testimony, you're a witness to specific events in your own life and circumstances that brought you to a point where you were listening to someone share the gospel, you were hearing that gospel, you were understanding that gospel, you were believing that gospel for the first time. Or maybe in a series of conversations that you were having with lots of people. Some of you probably grew up in the church, and you can't remember a time in your life when you weren't at least familiar with the name Jesus. Some of you came to faith later on in life, but either way, all of us have a testimony about those circumstances and moments in our life when Jesus became real to us. So we all have those kind of stories. So that's kind of what we're going to unpack today as we look at this. I'm going to read this here from 1 Peter 3, and we're going to work together on kind of teasing out from this text different aspects of a good testimony. But now who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you'll be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. So Peter here obviously talking to a persecuted group of Christians, writing to a persecuted group of Christians, and he's telling them that they are going to be, at times, called upon to share a reason for the hope that is in them. And when that happens, they're to do it in a certain way. So what are some of the principles you could tease out of this text here for what makes for a good testimony? What are some principles you could tease out of this?
With gentleness and respect.
Okay. Doing it with gentleness and respect, which would mean like what would that look like, or what would that look like not doing?
And now it's just a conversational story. It's
Yes.
not in your face. You have to do, pressure. It's just sharing your story.
Sharing your story, yeah.
Without, it's not pressure.
Right.
That's the Holy Spirit's work to work on the other person's heart.
Yeah, not trying to be the role of the Holy Spirit for someone, in someone's life. Trying to put this, trying to put a weight upon them that's not due. Yeah. What other things can we tease out of this? Yeah.
I think it would start out with your heart condition there. It says hearts that honor Christ as holy. So
Yes. Okay.
Your testimony should be to honor Christ and not bring attention to yourself.
Okay, that's a big one. Yeah, we want to honor Christ with what we do, not just draw attention to our own story, because that, of course, could be a real temptation, where we kind of can go off on a rabbit trail and talk about all of our exploits of both in sin and in righteousness, trying to share the gruesome stories about our BC days and the wonderful things that we've done since finding Christ. We don't want to go off on these tangents of drawing just attention to ourselves. We want to honor Christ as holy. What other principles we tease out of this?
Be prepared.
Ah, yes, that's a really important one. Be prepared.
Plan ahead, write it out, rehearse it.
Yes.
So when you're in a position to share your testimony, you have at least an outline that you're going to follow or try to follow as best you can as you're talking to a person.
Exactly. So being prepared, having an outline in your head. I mean, how many of us have done that? Where we've sat down, some of you have, that's good. And that's part of what today is getting you in the frame of mind of thinking, okay, how do I at least get a skeleton outline to what my testimony actually would include if I were to share it? Peter says, be prepared to do it. Think about it ahead of time. Think about what you're going to say, because you will be asked to say something. What other good principles we tease out of this? Yeah.
Trust and obey him.
Trust and obey him.
Yeah.
Yes. So, you can get that. Of course, here you got this idea of Christ as the Lord, right?
Yeah.
We're honoring Christ as Lord. So we're, in honoring Christ as Lord, we're obeying him in giving our testimony. Yeah.
We may not agree with the way that people live, but don't put them down. Try and get them to listen to what you say,
Right.
so that they will, so that you can present the gospel to them, so that you can talk to them. Because if you say right away, I don't believe in homosexuality, and they're a homosexual, they won't listen to you at all.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It says love the sin, but hate the sin.
And it's interesting. Right before this, if you go up a few verses from this, Peter's talking about if you're going to suffer, at least let it be for the name of Christ. Let it be for being a Christian. Don't suffer for being a jerk to people. That doesn't. You could suffer for. You could say you're suffering for being a Christian, but a lot of times Christians suffer just because they're bigots, and that's not good.
I just think in the whole aspect of hope, I think often the times I've been able to share my Christianity with another person is noticed, hopefully, I'm not saying I'm the best behaved person or whatever, but
Yeah.
when I'm suffering and having the opportunity to, they may ask, why are you like that or whatever, and to be able to share the hope that is within me in difficult circumstances.
Yes.
What God has done in my life, and who is my light, and who is my rock and my refuge. That just having hope to give to other people is a good part of it.
Absolutely. In fact, that's kind of a key term of the text here. What are you sharing within you? The hope that's in you. So the gospel message is a message of hope. And oftentimes we forget that gospel means good news. It's a good announcement. It's glad tidings of something that's happened. It's glad tidings of a person who's come and died for us. It's glad tidings of his resurrection. It's good news. And so, yeah, here is, and of course, then there's the benefits that come from that. There's eternal life. There's peace with God. There's justification. There's, future glory. There's all these things that are tied to our hope, and that has to be part of our testimony. Not just part of it, but a central aspect of what we say. Not just that I came to Jesus in some abstract, vague way, but that means I have hope. What is that hope? Okay. Any other things we could tease out of this?
I was thinking too, that can help you too to engage the other people, because you're sharing the hope that's within you, and then you can also ask them, what gives you hope? Where do you find hope at?
Mm-hmm.
And try to draw out of them what kind of things, and then, because if they're not a Christian, they're probably going to look to things that are temporal
Yes.
things, which can lead you to, other discussions.
That is key. It's after we've shared our story, how do we then turn things back towards the posture we've been talking about in this class of now we're asking questions again. And now that your story is sort of a reference point, and the gospel you just shared is a reference point for things, now you can turn that back. Yes. Where is your hope? That's good. That's really good.
I think it's important when it talks about a good conscience to realize that daily we have to try to be doers of the word and live it out.
Yes.
So that when we stand before somebody and give a testimony, that if others try to slander us, that our behavior won't be put to shame.
Right.
If we've acted properly, with our life. I mean, we're going to fail, but being able to admit, I sometimes, will fall into this or that. But,
Right.
The testimony of God's forgiveness there, but trying to maintain a good conscience in your own life so that when you give that testimony, it's coming from as pure heart as you can.
Right.
Try to have at that time, and not just getting up and giving a testimony because somebody asked you to do it, and maybe your heart's just not right, or it doesn't turn out well.
Exactly. In fact, that's a major theme throughout this entire paragraph here. You pulled out the phrase good conscience, but if you even go up a little bit, you can see the same kind of ideas. Zealous for what is good, suffering for righteousness' sake, right? These are themes that are here in this text that Peter's talking to people who, hopefully, his hope is that they're people who have been zealous for good and have been righteous. And that a good testimony is one that's paired with a life of righteousness, right? That hopefully our words, what we're saying about our hope, and our actions are aligning. Otherwise, there's a big credibility gap there in what we say. So, good thoughts here. Let me just list these out as sort of some of the things that we've learned here. Principles of good testimony. We just talked about this. A good testimony is best paired with a life of goodness. Here's a quote from Tim Keller I thought was pretty interesting. The righteous are, by definition, those who are willing to disadvantage themselves for the community, while the wicked are those who put their economic, social, and personal needs ahead of the needs of the community. Biblical righteousness is inevitably social because it is about relationships. When most modern people see the word righteousness in the Bible, they tend to think of it in terms of private morality, such as sexual chastity or diligence in prayer and Bible study. But in the Bible, zakah, that's the Hebrew term for righteousness, refers to the day-to-day living in which a person conducts all relationships in family and society with fairness, generosity, and equity. This is really key. When Peter uses the word righteousness here, he's talking about it in a social sense. You're persecuted for righteousness' sake. He's talking about, are you the kind of person who's known for being good and charitable and loving and sacrificing yourself for the needs of the community? Are you known for that? If you're the kind of person who's known for that, that's really key. There's a proverb that says, it says, when the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. That's a weird proverb, because today, if you look in the media, when you see people, when the news media grab a hold of certain people who are prospering, what tends to happen is those people get cut down. Those people get, they're just money grubbing, right? When you see a really prosperous person, the media tends to latch onto them and hate them. What the Proverbs say is, when the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. Why would a city erupt in joy when a righteous person prospers? It's because of what that righteous person does with their time and their talents and their treasure, right? Because that person is self-sacrificial in the way they've now stewarded their wealth and all that kind of stuff, people look at them and they're rejoicing because they think it's wonderful that this person is prospering. So yeah, when Peter talks about a good testimony needs to be paired with a life of goodness. Another good testimony, another good principle we get out of this is a good testimony is always verbal. Always verbal. You may have heard the often used expression by St. Francis, preach the gospel at all times and when necessary, use words. The caveat that I would add to St. Francis's statement is, and it's always necessary to use words. The sentiment is true. We of course want to live lives of righteousness. That's true. The first part is true. But your life of goodness is not the gospel. That's scary, actually, to think about my life of goodness being the gospel, because if that's true, then the world doesn't have any good news. Because my righteousness is as filthy rags. I've got nothing, right? Even if I'm a really, really nice person and other people think I'm a really nice person, that's still not good news. Not good news for them. So a good testimony is always verbal because you're pointing to something outside of yourself. A good testimony is personal. Peter says this, right? That's the hope that's in you that you're sharing. So it is going to be a personal testimony, but it's also a good testimony focuses chiefly on the hope of the gospel. So yeah, it's about your life, it's your story, but it's chiefly pointing outside of you to a message that gives you hope. That's really key. So it's about you, but it's a message of hope. Another thing, a good testimony is told without fear. He says this in a number of different ways. If you're going to talk to somebody about the hope of the gospel, he says, do it without fear. Peter, and the counsel on this he offers is kind of interesting. Peter kind of gives a sort of words of probability. He kind of speaks in probabilities. The first thing he says is, first of all, most people don't like to persecute or hate on people who treat them nice, people who are righteous. If you're truly sacrificing yourself for the needs of others, the needs of the community, most people don't come after you. Most people don't hate on you for that. But then he says, even if they do, your own gentleness and respect in how you respond to them is going to put them to shame. I remember this was in college. I had this. There was this guy. I majored in philosophy, so I was around a bunch of really weird people all the time. And I was in one of my right before one of my philosophy classes started. There was this guy I always got into these really engaging discussions with. He was an atheist, and he was always razzing me about whatever, anything. And I had some food. I had pizza that I was eating that day, right before class started. And so I'm eating it, and he looks at it and he goes, "Luke, can I have your pizza?" And I look at him and I'm like, I guess. Are you hungry? Did you eat lunch? He's like, "No, I didn't eat lunch. Can I have your pizza?" And I know he's just doing it just to goad me with something. So I was like, "Yeah, sure." I handed him my food. And he looks at me with this kind of disdain and says, "Is this that moment where I'm supposed to feel all convicted about the fact that you gave me your food and now the Holy Spirit's supposed to come upon me and convince me that Jesus is my Savior or something?" I mean, he's really snide and condescending. And I just kind of laughed it off. And all the other people around him, who were also all atheists, by the way, all the people around him were like, "Dude, he just gave you his lunch. why don't you shut up? Kind of a sort of this like, and at that moment you could tell he's like, yeah, I probably shouldn't treat him like such a jerk. Most people were like, that's stupid. You wouldn't chew somebody out for giving you their lunch. But and that's kind of Peter's point is even if someone does treat you badly for being a righteous person, the way you treat them with gentleness and respect in following that then puts them to shame. And then, of course, his final follow-up comment on this is, he says, ultimately, regardless of whether they hate you or love you, remember, honor Christ as holy. Ultimately, it's not their approval you're trying to get anyway. It's God's approval. God's the one you call holy. God's opinion's what matters to you, not theirs. So what he's trying to do is ease the fears of his readers and saying, you can do this without fear. If you're living a righteous life, and if you're treating people with gentleness and respect, most of the time, you're not going to get chewed out. Most of the time, they're not going to hate you. And even if they do, don't worry about it. You honor Christ as holy anyway. Honor Christ as holy. Do it without fear. A good testimony is also gentle and respectful. We mentioned that. I thought this was interesting. And the word gentle in the Greek, it doesn't mean docile or passive. That's not what the word means. It does not mean passive. It means moderate in temperament, even-tempered, tender, having no arrogant self-sufficiency, and inner mastery of your faculties. In other words, what that means is it's not a passive, flaccid person. That's not what gentle means. It means somebody who is tempered in the way they talk. They're tempered in the way they show their inner emotions. They're not going to get, they're not going to sway, they're not going to be up and down with all of their emotions when it comes to talking to people. Also, a good testimony involves something reasoned. That's what Peter says. Give them a reason for the hope that is in you. Right? So our faith has reasons. It's not just that we're saying, I have this hope, kind of the old hymn that you ask me how I know he lives within my heart. Really? That's probably better reasons than that. He lives for much better reasons than that, we know he lives for much better reasons than that. We need to say something reasoned. This is something that we do. Also, a good testimony involves preparation, and that's what you brought up. We prepare for this. I want someone to. Well, that's what we're going to do now. We're going to try to prepare some of this stuff. Let's go to Acts 26. I'd like someone to read, if you can, the entire chapter. We're going to listen to Paul preach here a little bit. I'd like to read the entire chapter of Acts 26, and we'll see what Paul has to say, or how we can use Paul as sort of an example of a good testimony. You got it? Okay, go for it.
So Agrippa said to Paul, you have permission to speak for yourself. Then Paul stretched out his hands and made his defense. I consider myself fortunate that it is before you, King Agrippa. I am going to make my defense today against all the accusations of the Jews, especially because you are familiar with all the customs and controversies of the Jews. Therefore, I beg you to listen to me patiently. My manner of life from my youth, spent from the beginning among my own nation and in Jerusalem, is known by all the Jews. They have known for a long time, if they are willing to testify, that according to the strictest party of our religion, I have lived as a Pharisee. And now I stand here on trial because of my hope in the promise made by God to our fathers, to which our 12 tribes hope to attain, as they earnestly worship night and day. And for this hope I am accused by Jews, O king. Why is it thought incredible by any of you that God raises the dead? I myself was convinced that I ought to do many things in opposing the name of Jesus of Nazareth. And I did so in Jerusalem. I not only locked up many of the saints in prison after receiving authority from the chief priest, but when they were put to death, I cast my vote against them, and I punished them often in all the synagogues, and tried to make them blaspheme. And in raging fury against them, I persecuted them even to foreign cities. In this connection, I journeyed to Damascus with the authority and commission of the chief priest. At midday, O king, I saw on the way a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, that shone around me and those who journeyed with me. And when we all had fallen to the ground, I heard a voice saying to me in the Hebrew language, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. And I said, Who are you, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But rise and stand upon your feet, for I have appeared to you for this purpose, to appoint you as a servant and witness to the things in which you have seen me, and to those for which I will appear to you, delivering you from your people and from the Gentiles, to whom I am sending you, to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. Therefore, O King Agrippa, I was not obedient to the whole heavenly vision, but declared first to those in Damascus, then in Jerusalem, and throughout all the region of Judea, and also to the Gentiles, that they should repent and turn to God, performing deeds in keeping with their repentance. For this reason, the Jews seized me in the temple and tried to kill me. To this day I have had the help that comes from God, and so I stand here testifying both to small and great, saying nothing but what the prophets and Moses said would come to pass, that Christ must suffer, and that by being the first to rise from the dead, he would proclaim light both to our people and to the Gentiles. And as he was saying these things in his defense, Festus said with a loud voice, Paul, you are out of your mind. Your great learning is driving you out of your mind. But Paul said, I am not out of my mind, most excellent Festus, but I am speaking true and rational words. For the king knows about these things, and to him I speak boldly. For I am persuaded that none of these things have escaped his notice. For this has not been done in the corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you believe. And Agrippa said to Paul, in a short time would you persuade me to be a Christian? And Paul said, whether short or long, I would to God that not only you, but also all who hear me this day might become such as I am, except for these chains. Then the king rose, and the governor and Bernice, and those who were sitting with them. And when they had withdrawn, they said to one another, this man is doing nothing to deserve death or imprisonment. And Agrippa said to Festus, this man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar.
Okay, so using Peter's principles that we just pulled out of that text in 1 Peter, how do we see Paul mirroring these principles in what he just did in this chapter? What do we see here? What do we see Paul doing in this chapter that mirrors these principles?
One of the things I noticed is how he's so respectful of the position.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes, he's very respectful to the king. This is King Agrippa II. This would have been the last leader of the dynasty of Herod the Great. Herod the Great, you'll know from the birth stories of Jesus. He tried to kill the infant Jesus when Jesus was really young, less than 2 years old, and his family has not been kind to Christians. It was his uncle, or his great uncle, who was involved in the trial of Jesus himself. His dad killed James the Apostle. So this family is not kind to Christians, generally speaking. So he's he's extremely respectful. Paul is respectful, which is what Peter says, right? He's respectful to the king. He's standing in front of him and treats him with dignity. He even calls them our people. He calls them as part of our people. He says, our people, you and me, king, we're part of the same tribe.
Told without fear.
Without fear, yes. Everything I just said about this family not being kind to Christians, Paul has reason to be afraid now. He's in front of him. He's in front of this man who could end his life. But he says it without fear. Yeah.
Paul talked about his he thought he was doing a good thing by killing Christians before
Mm-hmm.
he met Christ. So he was telling his history before Christ.
Yes. So we have there's something of an outline to this, which we'll get to in a little bit. Sort of a flow of Paul's story. We'll talk about what that flow looks like and how we can use it for our own testimonies. What other principles do you see up here that could apply to this thing that we just read from Acts 26?
Taught something reasoned. I mean,
Okay. Something reasoned. Yes.
The actual conversion where the Lord spoke to him and, you know, where he, like she said, where he come from
Sure.
and change that occurred because
Right.
of what Christ had done.
Yeah, think of the different elements. He doesn't write it out like a logical argument, right? He doesn't speak about it in sort of, premise 1, premise 2, conclusion. That's not how he writes. He tells a story, but it doesn't mean they're not something reasoned, laced within his story. Think of all of the rational arguments he's using. 1, Jesus' own appearance to him. That's pretty convincing, right? 2, at the end of it, he tells Agrippa. He's telling Festus this. He says, Festus. Now Festus is kind of the new kid on the block. He's the new procurator of the region, so he hasn't been around the region that long. And so he tells Festus. He says, Agrippa knows what I'm talking about. These things have not been done in a corner. He says these things haven't been done in a corner. In other words, all throughout Judea, Jerusalem, people know this stuff. This hasn't been done in a corner. This isn't some little weird cult with its secrets and nobody knows these things. Things are public. This stuff is public. This isn't unknown. So he uses so he's trying to give, again, something reasoned for Agrippa to hold on to here. What other principles do we see here in this testimony?
It's not on there, but Paul has a desired response that he wants.
Yes.
From Agrippa.
Okay.
And repentance.
Mm-hmm.
And he tells King Agrippa to repent.
Yeah, there is a desire for feedback here.
Yeah.
It's not just here's my story, now see you later. There is something he's trying to pull out of his listeners, which is really interesting. These are his judges, right? And if this was just merely a trial testimony, if he's just trying to get himself off the hook, right, and count himself as free, he wouldn't be trying to tease out of the listeners this feat. He's not just trying to get them to let him off the hook. He's trying to get them to respond to this. And it's so evident in the way he talks that Herod even says, do you think you could even convince me to be a Christian so soon? Like, it's even though he didn't say, all right, Herod, decision time to become a Christian. Even though he doesn't say that, it's very evident in the way he tells the story that this is a message that demands a response. And Herod's caught off guard by that. I thought I was just here to listen to some trial, to listen to someone's testimony so they can, be deemed guilty or innocent. This is something that demands allegiance from me. Oh man, this is different. This is not what I expected. Any other principles we see here? Yeah.
He was verbal.
Yes, verbal.
He didn't just expect them to see the change in him. He actually talked about how he was sincere as a Pharisee in what he did.
Yes.
But realized he was sincerely wrong.
Yeah.
And that once God spoke to him, that there was a change, and he was verbal about that change.
Yes, his whole testimony is very verbal. He doesn't just stand there and say nothing. Yeah, his testimony is for sure verbal. Yeah.
We gotta listen to what he says in his word.
Yes. It's clear that Paul is he's obviously very knowledgeable in the Bible, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, he is. In fact, he appeals to the Bible throughout this. He says, this has been, all the prophets have pointed to the resurrection of the dead. And that's his whole message. That's his hope that he's saying. All the prophets have said this is going to happen. And now the Messiah raises from the dead, and people think that's weird. That's not weird. If the Messiah would rise from of course we believe in the resurrection. And now the Messiah is risen. This is good news. And this is something the prophets anticipated. What else? Yeah.
I just think Paul always communicates that he cares. I mean, like,
Yes.
you can't walk away from any encounter with him knowing that he truly cares about the destiny and the people. And I think that is a huge thing with our own testimonies. When people know you care, that makes a whole lot of difference. I mean, you can do all those things, and those things are huge, but you certainly want to come across, I really care about where your soul is.
Yes. So he shows real care. Absolutely he does. Yeah.
Not only
the gospel where he's saying that God is helping him and changing him, and then also how he will be a light to the people and the Gentiles. So, and he talks about how what Christ has done in that part of the gospel, but
Yeah.
also what he will do and how there is hope for the future because Christ has done this.
Yes. And that ties to the hope aspect. There's a hope of the gospel. So there's a gospel. The gospel is a message about who Christ is and what he's done. But also tied to that is the hope of what Christ, now the living Christ, does, continues to do, and will do. That's all part of what the gospel is. So yeah, and Paul's really clear about that. He's bringing salvation, forgiveness of sins, not just to the Jewish people, but to all the nations of the world. And he's asked me to be a messenger to send that message out to people. So, yeah, these are all really, really good. Principles that we see here. And you might even we might add to this that obviously he was prepared. We know from the text of Acts that he had 2 years sitting in a prison in Caesarea, waiting to be on trial. Basically, the old governor just kind of shuffled the papers to the bottom of the pile, the Paul papers, and kind of, okay, we'll deal with this guy later. And then the old governor had to leave, and the new governor came in, and he's like, what's this on my docket? Like, who's this guy? He's been sitting in prison for 2 years waiting for someone to hear his trial. So he's had 2 years in prison waiting to talk to these leaders here. I bet you he's probably rehearsed this over and over in his own mind, what he's going to say. Other principles we can tease out of this, we've already mentioned some of this, but here's more principles we can tease out of this, Acts 26. Keep it short. We read the entire chapter in less than 4 minutes. 4 minutes. That's a good idea. You should don't go on and on, right? I mean, you don't need to, when I was 1, I did this, and 2, I did this, and then we moved, and then we didn't. No, just keep it short. And he kept it very brief, so that Agrippa had a snapshot of Paul's life. He had a real good sense of who he was, but he kept it short. And we can do the same thing. And that's one of the reasons why we have to prepare. Because some of us, myself included, we like to ramble. We like to just talk. And if we're not careful, that'll turn into a 15, 30-minute testimony. And a lot of people don't want that. They just want the snapshot. That's good. Another principle, make it adaptable. Adaptable. It's not so rigid that you tell the exact same thing with the exact same words every time. If you read Acts, this is not the first time Paul has shared this story. Go back to Acts 22. He shared the exact same account of his life, this time to a crowd of Jewish people in the temple. And even though the core details are the same, the other details that surround the story are a little different. And it's actually really interesting to go back and compare Acts 22 to Acts 26. Why did he include these details over here and these details over here and leave other details out? The reason why is because he's talking to a different group of people. And we have to do the same thing. Hopefully, if we followed the principles we've been following in this class so far of listening well to people, that we already have a sense of the kind of details they would want to know. The kind of details that would be really good for them to hear, and the kind of details that just don't matter. Hopefully we'll have a good sense of that as we've been listening to people. Another thing is make it vivid. He didn't just say, I was a pretty good Pharisee, and then Jesus met me on the road to Damascus, and that was pretty awesome, and now I'm a Christian. Like he tells the story in vivid detail, especially all the things that would really matter to the listener. He describes the appearance of Jesus on the road and the bright light and what Jesus said and all those kind of vivid details. He allows the person to put themselves as a spectator in Paul's story, like, oh, this is an interesting story. He uses language suited for the audience. That's really key. He talks in a way that he understands Agrippa. He understands who he's talking to. Who was Agrippa? I mean, Agrippa was he wasn't Jewish by blood, but he was actually part of an Edomite is what he was. But his family had been the kings of the Jews for better part of 70, 80 years that this family's been in charge of Jerusalem, has been in charge of the Judean areas and Galilee and that kind of stuff. So these were people who were religiously outwardly Jewish, even though they were pretty bad Jews. They were religiously outwardly Jewish. And so he tailors his message to what Agrippa already knew. And he even says that. He's like, I've been so looking forward, Agrippa, to talking to you because you understand all these customs of the Jews. You understand this stuff. I can't talk to these Romans about that stuff because they don't understand any of this. But you, I know you understand this. So I'm going to talk in language you can understand. Don't sugarcoat. Paul doesn't have the opportunity to sugarcoat here. He's literally standing in chains in front of the guy. Clearly, he's not trying to paint his life as some rosy white picket fence picture of the gospel. Oh, I met Jesus and now my life is wonderful. Clearly not. Clearly his life is not wonderful right now. He's been in prison. Like, his life is not rosy good. He doesn't sugarcoat. He doesn't say, no, now everything is wonderful in my life, that kind of thing. He doesn't do that. But at the same time, he also makes it clear the gospel is good news. He makes it really clear the gospel is good because we're sharing the story of forgiveness, the message of forgiveness to the world. He also makes it clear the gospel's true. This isn't just an opinion. This isn't, I think this is the right way to go. I think this is the right way to live. This is the message Jesus gave me. He is the one who gives me this message. Another key thing here, and I put this on your outline, pick one gospel theme. Pick one gospel theme. This is really, I think, really important if you want to keep it short. What is the message we're sharing with people? We're sharing the message of what? Hope. So go through the scriptures. When you go through the Old and New Testament, you see that this hope of the gospel is actually described for us. What is it we're looking forward to? What is it that we have now in Christ that we didn't have before we met Christ? And if you look at some of these, I put it in kind of a little chart here for you, so you can see some of the words that are used in the Bible to describe the hope we have. It's not just some vague hope. It's not just, and by the way, when the Bible uses the word hope in the Greek does not mean wish. Okay? We tend to use the word hope, and we mean, I hope this is going to happen, meaning I wish it's true. I'm not sure it's going to happen, but I wish. That's not what it means. The word hope in the New Testament means expectation. It means anticipation. That's what the Greek word means. And so when we look at our hope, what we're talking about is, this is what I anticipate. This is what I hope is good. This is my hope. In other words, I expect this from God. And so some of these terms here, I have peace with God now. Not just peace in my heart or a peaceful, easy feeling, that kind of peace, but peace with God. I have peace with God now. Whereas before, I was condemned. I have freedom now, meaning I have freedom from trying to justify myself, trying to prove myself to God, or trying to earn God's favor. Instead, before, I was enslaved. I was enslaved to that. I was always trying to earn God's favor, but now I don't. Joyful nearness to God is something we hope, not just something we have now, but we will have. Versus being alienated from God. I was far from God. I was not near him. I have a clean conscience now versus self-condemnation. Before, I condemned myself for all the things. My conscience was constantly condemning me, but now I have a clean conscience. Christ-likeness. Not only am I growing day by day into the image of Christ, but someday I'm going to see Christ in all his glory, and it's going to change me entirely. I'll be just like him. Versus depravity. Before, there was no change, or what change I had was shallow, and it wasn't lasting, it wasn't real. Eternal life. I have the hope of eternal life. Versus before, all I was facing was eternal death. So, as you think about how am I going to craft my testimony, latch onto a gospel theme, one theme of a hope that really resonates with your story. For me, it's probably self-condemnation. I grew up with a very guilty conscience. As a child, I always felt guilty for everything I did. Even when I was trying to be good, I felt like I wasn't good enough. Even when I was trying to be great, even when I was trying to be, even when I did good things, I typically did them for wrong reasons or bad motives. And that was, for me, hearing the gospel, the fact that God doesn't judge me on the basis of my works, but instead on the work of Christ, completely transformed my mind. So when I'm thinking about how am I going to share my story, that is part of the story I'm going to share. So for you, I'm going to ask this: are there any themes here of your BC days that you look at this, the right column there, without hope, without God? Are there any themes that really resonate with you in your story when you're thinking about, well, this is what I was like before Christ?
That I can actually access him now.
Yes. Okay. So that you felt far from him before?
Yeah, that I just, I know how bad I am.
Yeah.
And it's like I don't deserve that, but to have that access because of Jesus and to really have that faith to live in that.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Yes.
So I think, yeah.
And that is a huge deal, right? I mean, you're talking about the creator of the universe, right? I mean, that's a tremendously good news, right? That I was alienated from my creator, and now I'm not. That's really good news. And that's what we want to, that's part of the hope. Anyone else? What really resonates with your story, some of the themes? Obviously, all these overlap. I understand that. These are not bifurcated little columns here. I get that. These all bleed into each other. But these are some of the words that the Bible uses.
Joy, nearness to my God.
Yes.
Joy that comes from that, because in my original, when I first became a believer, I could just vividly picture shaking my fist at God. Why would I want a God like that? And then, so I was agitated with God, and then when God revealed himself to me through his word, the joy of knowing him as he is, not what I thought he was.
That's so similar to Paul's story too, isn't it? I'm this Pharisee, outwardly whatever I am, but then at the same time I'm raging at people, I'm raging at Christians and going after them and whatever, and then all of a sudden God halts me in my tracks, and now things are different. Yeah.
Feeling unloved to being loved mightily.
Yes. So feeling unloved to being loved. Yeah. I've heard one person say his summary of this was a good summary of the gospel. Cheer up. You're worse than you ever dared imagine, but you're more loved than you ever dared hope. You're worse than you ever dared imagine, but you're loved than you ever dared hope. And so, yeah, there's that sense of who would love someone like me? Who would love this wreck of a person? And yet, I've been loved. Yeah.
Well, mine was as a child.
And
it was feeling not the love that I needed.
Sure.
As a child, to the realization that God loved me and will always love me.
Yeah. And even latching onto even when you're crafting a testimony, latching onto some of the particulars of why was it that you didn't feel loved? Parents or what were the circumstances that was like, so that when you heard the gospel, that's what I've been looking for all my life. So yeah, any other themes that latch on? Yeah.
To trust and obey his word.
Okay, so trusting, yeah. So the all of a sudden now having his word, and that's the thing that's really I think really amazing. The nearness of God to our lives, especially through his word, that's such a blessing of the gospel, that we worship a God who's not silent. We worship a God who's not silent. It's not that he created us and then left us to rot. He actually spoke into our world. Yeah. Any other themes here that stand out for you for your story?
One was eternal death. I was afraid of eternal death. I was very young. But then it's cool to see how God used the other ones as I grew in him.
Yes.
At 5, I did not want to go to hell. And that was scary. And I kept feeling like I was going to hell, even though I had trusted him at that young age, but then he used lots of these other themes to draw me to him.
Sure. That's fantastic. Yeah. The fear of death and what lies after it. The book of Hebrews talks about that we are enslaved to the fear of death. And you find that all over in people's lives. I don't think when the book of Hebrews talks about the fear of death that it's talking about, or should I say, be enslaved to the fear of death. I don't think it's necessarily talking about the way that we're always consciously fearing death and enslaved to that fear, as much as it means that we're constantly enslaved to the things that distract us from that fear.
Well, I don't want to suffer.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, to die in a fiery car crash would be better than to have a long lingering illness where I lingered
Right.
for a year.
knowing that death is coming.
Like,
Yeah.
Maybe a plane crash would be, better.
And people, the fact that there's a what's the number one fear is fear of public speaking. The number 2 fear is death, which is kind of weird because that means for most people, if they're at a funeral, they'd rather be in the casket than doing the eulogy. But no, it's true. The fear of death is an incredibly common fear. It's universally common. And yet we live in a culture that does everything possible to distract people from the finiteness of life. You live for the moment and just soak up as much as you can right now and distract yourself from all that stuff. So when you tap into your own story and you say, the thing that really terrified me was, I know death is a reality. I know it's coming. What's after that? Here's what I know is after that, and I'm terrified of that. Well, you know what? That's a good gospel theme we could bring in. Only a few minutes left here. I want to get to some of the particulars of this. Preparing an outline. One thing that Paul did is he connects to the listener. That's the first step. Anytime you're crafting an outline, you connect to the listener first. You need to know something about the audience. You need to know something about who you're talking to when you're sharing your testimony. Now, sometimes you don't have all the information, but having some information about someone's life can help you to know where you're going to start. Where are you going to start in your story? Connect to the listener in some way. How does Paul do this? Paul does this by saying, King Agrippa, I'm glad you're here. You understand all the nuances of Jewish customs and stuff, and I'm glad I'm talking to you right now because you'll understand this. So that's how he connects. How are you going to connect to other people? Well, you have to listen to what people are, the things that are going on in other people's lives, and look for opportunities then to tie in your own story. The second part of this is, we're going to be talking about the before. What's Paul's before? My life as a Pharisee. How I lived as, someone who was under the law, following all the customs of my people. And of course, persecuted Christians a whole lot. I followed them to foreign cities, arrested them, threw them in chains, threw them in prison, killed some of them. This was the guy who was standing watching the first martyr die. He was holding the cloaks. He was there holding the cloaks of people throwing the stones. So this guy's been involved in persecuting Christians from the get-go. So think about some questions you could be thinking about as you're crafting your testimony. What was your life like before you understood the gospel? Where does your story start? What was your family life like? What was your social life like? How did you think about yourself in that time? How did you think about God in that time? What were your worries? What were your insecurities? What were your fears? What did your life revolve around? Think about some of those questions. Again, the whole idea is we want to make it short, but we want to latch on to some really vivid details about what my life was like before that's going to connect to the next part, which is the how. How did you hear about the gospel? And this is really key. It's not just that you heard about the gospel, but this is where you say, here's what the gospel is. This is what someone told me. This is the words I heard, either from the mouth of a preacher or a friend or whoever you heard it from first. Or maybe not even the first time, but the time it really gripped you and you understood it. Maybe you sat under preaching your entire life and you heard the gospel, but it's that moment when it's like, oh, light bulb goes on. I get it. How did you hear that? So think about it's not going to be like Paul's. I get that. I'm assuming none of us in here have had a more visually and viscerally dramatic conversion than Paul does, right? I'm assuming none of you actually saw the risen Jesus on the road somewhere. I get that. Paul's unique in that respect. But it's not unique in the sense that, in one sense, we can say every conversion is dramatic, because every conversion is about someone dead coming to life again. Every conversion is dramatic. So tell that story of how you heard it and how you understood it. And then, of course, the after. He talks about his ministries to sharing the good news to others. So connect this to your theme. How is the hope of the gospel made a difference in your life? You now have this hope, right? Hopeless. Here's the message of hope. Now how's that hope made a difference? Make sense? Before, no hope. I got hope. How's that hope made a difference? Be specific. Be real specific about that. Again, being short. And then the last part, which you mentioned, was conclusion with feedback. You're asking now for them to respond, right? After he gives his testimony, Festus jumps in. Hold on a second, Paul. Agrippa jumps in. Hold on a second, Paul. And Paul's engaging with them. He's asking them questions. He asks for feedback. So ask for feedback. Give an opportunity for the listener to ask more questions and give their feedback. One more quote I want to leave with you, or one idea I want to leave with you, and this is really, really important. We've already mentioned this a couple times, so I'll just want to end with this, make sure it's clear. Know what the gospel is and what the gospel isn't. The gospel is the message that was shared with you about who Jesus is and what he did for you. The gospel is not the fact that you got saved. That's true, you got saved. But the fact that you got saved, that's not the gospel. You are not the gospel. Your story is not the gospel. The gospel is not that you have a relationship with Jesus. Yes, you do. Yes, it's part of the hope. But it's not what happened to you that is the good news. It's part of the story of the good news, but it's not the good news. The good news is about Christ. The gospel is about, and this is really key, the gospel can only be good news for us because it's not about us. And that needs to be really clear when you tell your testimony. It's good news for you, the listener. It's good news for you because it's not ultimately about me or about you. It's about who Christ is. That's the key. Your life isn't anything, I hate to break it to you, but your life's not anything special, right? You're one of billions of people who's ever lived, some of whom have known Christ, some of whom have not. But your life's not any. What the special life we need to be focusing on is the life of Jesus, is who he is and what he's done. Here's this word by J. Gresham Machen from 1932. This is what he wrote. Christian experience is necessary to evangelism, but evangelism does not consist merely in the rehearsal of what has happened in the evangelist's own soul. We shall indeed be but poor witnesses for Christ if we can tell only what Christ has done for the world or for the church and cannot tell what he has done personally for us. But we shall also be poor witnesses if we recount only the experiences of our own lives. Christian evangelism does not consist merely in a man's going about in the world saying, "Look at me, what a wonderful experience I have, how happy I am, what wonderful Christian virtues I exhibit." You can all be as good and happy as I am if you will just make a complete surrender of your wills in obedience to what I say. That is what many religious workers seem to think evangelism is. We can preach the gospel, they tell us, by our lives, and do not need to preach it by our words. But they are wrong. Men are not saved by the exhibition of our glorious Christian virtues. They are not saved by the contagion of our experiences. We cannot be the instruments of God in saving them if we preach to them thus only ourselves. Nay, we must preach to them the Lord Jesus Christ, for it is only through the gospel which sets him forth that they can be saved. So, yes, your personal experience is important. If you can't share what Christ has done for you, then there's probably a problem. That's true. However, what Christ has done for you is only a small sliver of the story, of the big story of the gospel. And that big story is what needs to come out. It's that big story of who Jesus is and what he did that needs to come out. And so my challenge to you this week would be to take this idea, this outline, on all the principles we've talked about, and sit and create a sort of bullet point outline of your story. And then get in front of the mirror, or just whatever, yourself, and rehearse it. And then, after you've done that, rehearse it in front of someone you trust and care about, another Christian that you know. Share it then. Share it in front of them. Let them hear what your story is. And then ask for feedback. Maybe they'll be saying, oh, you know what? That was really interesting, but some of these details, I don't know that those really help the theme that you're going with here. Or maybe they'll say, you know what? You need to share more details about this because that is a really gripping part of the story. Or whatever it is. Allow that shared experience of sharing your testimony then become something that you rehearse so that when you get in front of other people and share your story, it's something that's going to kind of morph over time as you get to have more conversations with people. And hopefully these principles that we've learned from 1 Peter and from Acts 26, hopefully that'll shape the way you share it. So, any other thoughts before we go?
Gospel isn't prosperity. So many today
Yes.
connect
Yeah.
gospel with prosperity, as if those that are saved, they're well off.
Mhm.
And that if for some reason you're not economically well off, you need to get right with God.
Obviously the prosperity gospel preachers didn't really study the life of the apostles very well. Paul says, we as the apostles are seen as last of all, as scum of the earth. That's how Paul described the apostles. We're scum of the earth. Going about poor, being bruised and abused everywhere they went, that's not prosperity by any definition. We can't. And Paul, of course, that Peter makes that clear in his first letter when he wrote that, right? He was writing to persecuted Christians. The whole thing is a handbook on how to deal with persecution. And in Acts 26, Paul's a prisoner. And some of the best examples of testimonies we get in the Bible are not testimonies of people who have it all together and everything's going well for them. It's people who do not have things going well for them, and now they're sharing about who does have the hope. It's Christ. It's not their lives. Any other thoughts before we go? We're done here. Okay, I'm going to pray. We'll go. Father, we are so grateful for the gospel of Christ and the hope that it brings, the love that He's shed abroad in our hearts, so that we can know that we are children of God. And we are grateful for your the evidences that you've given us to know that Jesus is true, that Jesus is real, that He is the Son of God. But more than this, Father, we thank you that the Holy Spirit has impressed all the words from your scriptures, the activities, your works, great works in history, that your Holy Spirit has impressed those things upon our heart, so that we've personally come to faith. Our faith is a gift from you. Our lives are a gift from you. Everything that we have comes from your hand. I pray, Father, that we can be good stewards of the story you've given us, not just of our own lives, but of the life of Jesus, and that we can share that with others. I pray you will give us opportunities to do that this week and every week after. And you will help us to hone and refine the stories that we share, so that it won't be a matter of pride for us or wanting to seek attention or glory, but instead wanting to give you glory and wanting to give you honor and praise, and honoring you as holy. We thank you, and we pray for this in the name of Jesus. Amen.